Let's start with Dave. Tell me your name and basic information about you, like when you were born and who your parents were, that sort of thing.
I'm David Peake. I was born December 1st, 1943. My parents were Robert and Charlotte Peake. During the war, my dad worked for Scintilla Bendix, which was the old name for the manufacturing facility in Sydney. Because he worked there, he had a draft deferment, but he was sent to Sheboygan, Wisconsin for a while, and then Sandusky, Ohio, and that's where I was born. They came back, as the story goes, I think he drove back, my mom flew back. I was wrapped up in a laundry basket and her parents picked us up at LaGuardia Airport and took us to their home in Scarsdale, the Bowman home. Then we lived in Franklin. I went to school there through 7th grade, and my mother got a teaching job in Jefferson, and we moved to Jefferson in the summer of 1957. And I went to school there and graduated with a class of 1962.
Thank you. I remember your mom being our home ec teacher. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And you must have been across the street from us, I think.
Yes.
Right on Summit Street.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. How funny. Yeah. So you got to Jefferson, and what did you do in school in Jefferson? Were you on the sports teams?
Yeah, I was involved in just about everything. Played basketball and baseball, very grudgingly ran cross country to get in shape for basketball, essentially. Had the basic, Regents diploma and took the pretty standard curriculum that was offered. Worked on the yearbook. They did a monthly kind of little newsletter thing and worked on that.
I think you were on the student senate.
I was on the student senate. I was one of the first members of when they started the National Honor Society in Jefferson. Myself and probably Norma Nichols, and I'm not sure who all else would have been involved with that.
And how did you meet Gail?
I was a sophomore, she was a freshman. We were in Mrs. Becker's Latin class. And we were sitting next to each other, and we kind of talked and chatted, and nothing really seriously happened until we were both at one of the school dances, and I asked her to square dance with me, and I guess that's where the relationship got more serious. But we went together for the rest of the high school. I had received a Navy ROTC scholarship that would pay me to go to Iowa State University. So that's where I went. Gail she graduated a year behind me and went to State University of New York at Oneonta, and she was a education teaching major. And she accelerated through there and graduated in 3 years by going basically year round. I started out as an aerospace engineering major at Iowa State, plus I was taking the ROTC coursework. Had a little problem with some of the math, and had a conflict between a math course that I had to take in my ROTC course, so I ended up taking a year's leave of absence from ROTC and did the math, came back in, chose to go into what they call the Marine option, which commissioned you into the Marine Corps rather than the Navy. So it took me 5 years to get through, and Gail, she'd come out to visit once or twice, and she got a teaching job in Des Moines my senior year, because she was accredited and all for elementary education. So at that point I had proposed to her. I graduated on like the 27th of May and went through the commissioning, packed up everything, and we had it all set up to get married on the 10th of June. And in order to do that, I had to skip a class at the Marine Officers Basic School, so instead of starting, they had wanted me to start the 28th or 9th of May, and it got skipped to the 27th of June. So
Good.
17 days after we were married, packed up most everything that would fit in a Volkswagen and reported in at Quantico, Virginia.
What year was that?
That was 1967.
Oh, right in the middle of the Vietnam
It
War.
was getting heated up, yes.
Right.
Graduated from Officers Basic School in November. Had a quota to go to the Army Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And once again, we packed everything we could in a Volkswagen and headed for Oklahoma.
Was it one of those little Volkswagens? or
Yeah,
the
it
big
was a little bug.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was full. Got to Oklahoma, graduated there, had orders to 3rd Marine Division in Vietnam, and as I said, packed up everything. And my father at the time, my parents had divorced, and he was living in Santa Monica, out in the greater Los Angeles. So we set it up that she would stay there with another wife from another member of the basic school class, and I reported into San Francisco and got a flight out of the Air Force Base there and landed in Okinawa. And had about a week transition there, and then reported into Da Nang, Vietnam.
Wow.
Out in the field with the Marine Corps. I was a forward observer, and basically they're assigned out into the infantry battalions and companies. So I had about 6 months out in the bush with Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, and later in the headquarters of 4th Marines.
This was no desk job.
It was not a desk job, and not at all. After I transferred out of that part of 3rd Battalion, 12th Marines was the artillery unit I was with. I transferred back to headquarters battery and was given the job of running a fire direction center that was connected with the 1st Amphibian Tractor Battalion down on the beach at Quaviette, and that's where I spent the rest of my Vietnam service time. Met Gail a couple of times for R&R, once in Hawaii and once in Japan.
Nice.
And then since I had orders to Hawaii, I was assigned to the headquarters battalion at Fleet Marine Force Pacific, and this was another series of desk jobs while I was there.
Good.
And I resigned my regular commission and took a reserve commission, and we left there in September of, I came out of the Marine Corps in September of 1972. Gail and her sister Nadine were living with us in Hawaii. She was living with us in Hawaii, and they'd started a little independent job of their own making Christmas ornaments out of the pieces of palm trees. So I worked for a while with the duty-free shoppers organization there in Hawaii, and
Which island?
we were on Oahu. Yeah, but we got to visit, all the other islands, and I didn't get extended with duty-free shoppers, so we decided we would sell the house we had and come on back home here. The Marine Corps still owed me a full transition. In other words, they had, full household goods and everything. So we flew in back here, and because I had the Marine Corps paying the transportation, we opted to take what they call surface option from Hawaii to into Port of Los Angeles. So we came back on the Lurling, one of the cruise ships. Gail was pregnant at the time, and the motion of the boat didn't treat her particularly kindly. So we got back, and Nadine flew back with everything that she had that needed to come, and a dog. Got into Albany Airport in early April, just after it had snowed a foot.
Oh, yes.
The dog, who'd never been outside of Hawaii, jumped out of the crate and landed in a foot of snow and had no idea what was happening to him. Just froze in place, literally. What are you doing to me? So we came back here and basically moved in with George and Marietta and Nadine.
And Russell.
And Russell. He was still in the house. Nadine was the first. She married George Wilson and moved over there. Shannon was born.
By over there, you mean next door?
The Wilson farm. Over there on Shoe Hollow. Shannon was born the 2nd of August. I was working for a while up in Albany at the State University of Albany. Gail got a teaching job 1 year, I think, in Jefferson, and then she had an option to, and took it to start elementary teaching in Gilboa. And she retired from there after 30 odd years. And I worked in Albany for about 3 years at the university.
What did you do at the university there?
Well, it was a training unit that did training for state employees. So we did that, and I was one of the admin people and didn't do any of the real training, but there again I didn't get picked up for continuing employment, so we came back here, and then I worked for, I started with what was called IDS Financial Services, working with Jeff Miller. And that transitioned into a few other things, and it finally came out as Ameriprise Financial Services. And Jeff and I worked together and had an office in Stamford and office in Cobblescale. And finally,
Now, were you an investment advisor only, or were you a broker also?
well, I was a registered investment advisor, and we could sell any of the Ameriprise products. We were licensed to sell brokerage stuff. We had both whole and variable life insurance, and we sold actual fee-based plans, depending on, so you interviewed the people and took down, you talked with them about, what their existing assets were, what they wanted to do, what they ultimately wanted to be, and then proposed a plan to get them from where they were to where they wanted to be. And you sometimes they would invest with you, and that went on until like 2009, I think.
Well, and I know the Jefferson Alumni Association really admired you and had you work as their investment advisor.
Yeah, and I was part of the Alumni Association at Jefferson, and I still need to get a hold of Callan Little, the current treasurer, because there's an account that I set up there that they can't get their hands on because they don't have Ameriprise doesn't have a current authorized name to withdraw the funds, but this was one that we set up to do scholarships with Marty Wenzel, who was the Alumni Association president at that time.
Nice. And that was a very successul program. The seniors always appreciate getting those
Sure.
scholarships. Yeah.
So then, we're going boom boom downstairs. That's Meadow.
The 2-year-old. The 2-year-old granddaughter.
So that went on for a while, and I was here, and then we decided to start Cowbella and do the value-added milk production. And we got some funding from Farm Credit East, and created what's now the butter plant up the road. It had been a trailer site, and Marietta and George had lived up there for a while until she passed away, and then he sold the trailer and he moved back here. And then,
Well, let me back up a little bit here. We're kind of getting into the Danforth farm now. So if you could give us a little information about Gail and her parents and, then the length of time the Danforth farm has been in existence.
Yeah.
And then we'll go into the details. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, Gail's father was George and her mother was Marietta Rickard Danforth. George was generation 4 to grow up on the farm. Gail, Russell, Nadine, and Alan were generation 5. Shannon is generation 6, and my grandkids are generation 7s. Gus and Daisy and Miss Meadow, the boom boom downstairs.
Oh, and we should mention Shannon's sitting right next to you here, being very quiet at the moment. Sorry.
But, it was for me it was fascinating because we got to, the family was somewhat a family of pack rats because there were books and photos and certificates and all of this fine stuff that were still here that we could look at. The first Danforth to come here was Nahum, Nahum, Nahum Danforth, and as far as we know, he built a cabin. We think up where the tree line is as you come down the road.
It's a little murky.
Yeah, that one's not.
He married Esther Mann, and the Mann farm was right next door here. And her parents are actually buried in the woods out here. There's a little cemetery with just their 2 headstones.
So that might be near
Hiddai
where
and
the
Levi Mann. So I think maybe what happened. We're not sure if he knew her before he moved here, because no one had ever settled this land before he did. So whether she brought him here and that's why he settled here, or whether he settled here and then fell in love with the neighbor's daughter, we're not 100% sure on that. I have to talk to Kevin a little bit and see if he has any insights. They might have lived with her parents for a little while they built this house here. It was 1817 when Nahum came, and we figure the house was built sometime like in the 1820s or 30s.
It's fascinating, yeah.
Gold pole and beam construction. We can take you downstairs and show you some of the beams are still have the bark on them.
Yes.
And then sometime after that, they were making butter downstairs. And sometime after they started that, they raised the house. Because there's a couple of the pictures, and one has much more foundation than the other does. But, it's old hand laid up stone foundation, and Nahum and Esther had a son, George Washington, who took over the farm, and
that was an interesting piece of the history because he wasn't the oldest brother. He had older brothers, and so why he was the one who ended up taking over, we're not exactly sure. I theorize it's because of the time of his father's death. Maybe the older sons had gone out already and established their own farms and had their own lives, and it just happened to be that he was in his late teens when his father died, and so he was here still, and he was the one who ended up taking over.
Was he the youngest?
No.
Oh.
He had there were 8 children, and I think that he had a younger brother still. So, he was kind of in the middle, and Kevin Berner's ancestor, where we connect, was one of George Washington's older brothers that had already left the farm at that point. So, yeah, so it was, one of those twists of fate that, things ended up, being in our line from that point on. And so George Washington married Martha Baird, and she was, I think, one of my favorite parts of our farm's history. She was very inspirational to me personally. She was my great-great-grandmother, and she was the only other woman to run the farm, and it was by default because George Washington Danforth passed away when he was 50 years old very suddenly. And so she was left to keep the farm running and to support her family. They had 6 children. There was another boy who passed away when he was 3 years old. So the only living boy was my great-grandfather, Everett. And he was 11 when his dad passed away. So until he was old enough to take over, Martha and the 2 older girls kept the farm running, and the way that they did it was by making butter. And so they sold their butter to a lot of the boarding houses in Stamford, which was a very thriving community at that time. And she ended up sending her butter to the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, and she won this beautiful award for it that we still have hanging in the kitchen.
First prize.
Yes, yes. And I've heard that, apparently, it was something that a lot of the farms were doing, that year. There were a lot of, Jersey farms around the area that also sent their butter to the Chicago World's Fair. But according to all of the town historians that I've ever spoken to, she's the only one who won an award that year for her butter out of everyone in this area. And her daughter, her oldest daughter, Hattie, who was her right-hand woman, she also won a certificate for assisting in her mother's butter-making project, which we have as well. So when we were formulating the ideas of doing something with value added, that was immediately, where we went to with, thinking about butter and this great legacy and history that she had created on the farm. So she was a wonderful inspiration to us, and why we decided to go in the butter making direction. And the fact that we ended up with, this legacy of, this great herd of Jersey cows, which are the perfect cows for making butter.
They are.
And I think the reason that happened was because when Everett did end up taking over, he was the one who brought in the first purebred registered jerseys in 1919. We've had a continuous herd since then. And I think the reason that he decided to go with, a purebred Jersey herd was his mother's influence with butter making. He was looking at, the components and, what a great breed of cow they are, in that way. So a lot of people were going for the Holstein, breed. Because,
I was just going to ask. I understand that the Jerseys don't produce as much, but it's higher butter cream quality.
Yeah, so Holsteins can produce twice as much milk as Jerseys on average, but the components in the Jersey milk are much richer with butter, fat, and protein. So it was kind of an unconventional idea that he had, to do that. And and I'm very thankful. I love my Jerseys.
Oh, yes.
I wouldn't want to milk anything else. But you weren't really paid for your components until the mid 1900s, and at that point, when you put milk on the milk truck, you were just getting paid for quantity. So it was, a very unconventional choice. But, you have the other, part of the history of Jefferson that comes into play, that, Jefferson was called Buttertown, and there were 2 creameries here. And so I think that all of those factors influenced why we have this beautiful Jersey herd today.
Wonderful. Yeah. So tell me, oops, good timing.
There's always lots going
Not
on
in the middle
around
of
here.
That's good. But a little bit more about George, Gail's father, and her mother. Just a little, background about when they were.
He was, of course, he grew up on the farm, and he was the oldest brother. He had 4 older sisters. 5 older sisters. And he was a graduate of the College of Cobleskill. And when he finished there, he took a job as the herd manager for the dairy herd at the prison in Napanock.
Napanock.
It's down in Orange County, or
Okay.
somewhere down there. And when Everett died, he came back to take over the farm.
1937.
Okay.
And that was also the year that he married my grandmother. And she was from Cobleskill. They met at SUNY Cobleskill, doing a play called Strawberry Cake, I think, is the story. And so they were married, and my grandfather was one of the great loves of my life. And I'm going to get a little emotional here. But he was my motivating factor for coming back to the farm. It was when he passed away in 2004 that I decided to come back and take things over after I had been away at college and, out in the world for about 10 years. Because I knew how important it was to him that the legacy of the farm continue, and I knew that there was no one else in my generation who was interested in doing that. I always knew I wanted to come back and that I wanted to raise my children here, but I wasn't sure in what capacity that would be. And I was always a little, hesitant about, I saw growing up here, with him and my Uncle Russ running the farm, how difficult it was. It's a very hard life. There are a lot of tough decisions that you have to make. And, I've always been an animal person, and I would get very attached to the cows. And so I think the ideas of, the tough decisions that you have to make in dairy farming were very intimidating to me. But when he passed away, I got to the point where I realized that if the farm was going to continue, it was going to have to be me that did it. And so I did decide, to just jump in with both feet and go for it.
Thank goodness.
So here we are today.
Yeah.
But it was the connection and the love that I had for my grandfather that really made it so important for me to do that. And, I think since I've come back, we've really, delved even more deeply into the farm history and, realized that it's just such a unique place in this day and age, that there aren't very many places that are left like ours anymore, and what a treasure it truly is.
Absolutely. I think I'm not supposed to talk in this, but I have to say this, the whole town felt the same way about your granddad.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
he was a great
He was
man.
deeply involved in so many things, so much of the town.
And he just had such a buoyant spirit, he never let anything get him down. He had such a great sense of humor about everything. He was silly, he would speak pig Latin with his dentures out, just to be funny. He just, he didn't have an easy life. There were many years that were very difficult here for him. to keep the farm going. My grandmother was sick for many years. She had brain tumors, and she had the first one when my mom was 14. And it was an incredibly difficult time. My grandfather always told the story when they found out that she had the first brain tumor and that she had to have surgery. He said he prayed to God to give him 5 more years until the kids were a little older, and he said, and God granted me 20. He was always so grateful for that. But it was a very tough time. And it wasn't really until my Uncle Russ came back after he had been in the military and been in college, and they ran the farm together, starting in the 60s and through the 70s and 80s and 90s, that, they achieved, a more comfortable life here. Yeah. But,
so he must have gone through the Depression here on the farm. Did he ever talk about that? Do you remember any stories?
I think I asked him about it a few times. I think that the history of the farm, the fact that it was so established, at that point, there was still quite a bit of stability, like even through the Depression. I think it was like, more in the 50s that, things were more difficult when he was, doing the majority of everything himself here. But there was a great sense of family, like all through those years. My great Aunt Alice, who was one of his older sisters, she was born deaf, and she was still a part of the farm at that point. She was here and involved with things. And his younger brother, my great uncle Paul, was involved until the 50s. So, there was a, kind of a team effort going on through that time, I think, that, kept things pretty stable.
Once upon a time, I think between George and his brother Paul, they had decided that they were going to do 2 functions. There was going to be a dairy operation, and there was going to be a chicken operation.
I was just about to ask that. Good.
And Paul was the one who was going to run the chicken business, and that's why the chicken house is still standing out there. And that apparently worked very well during the war. But once the war was over, and the whole demand for food changed so dramatically that chicken prices just dropped through the floor, chicken and egg prices. And so they ultimately got rid of the chickens. Paul went off to college and lived his life mostly in southern Pennsylvania.
We were very close to his 2 sons, my cousin Brian Danforth and my cousin Steve Danforth. And Brian lives in Unadilla now. Steve is in Pennsylvania. But they're both very involved still with the farm and everything that we do here.
Interesting that the military demand that was created would make such a difference once the war was over. I never realized that.
But because you're not only processing food for, and shipping it to all the American servicemen overseas, but you were also providing much of the food for Europe, which had been so destroyed by the war.
Sure. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So it's primarily been a dairy farm and the chickens for a little bit of time. Any other crops that you particularly?
Pretty much focused on that. Our neighbors, the Bucks and the Z's, always did maple syrups. I think my grandfather never felt a need to go in that direction. He was very close with them. They had pigs and horses and, the basic farm animals for most of the history of the farm. But it's always been primarily dairy.
Right.
Yeah, there's a great story because George and Jay-Z basically grew up together.
Sure.
And I'm sure as rambunctious youngsters, they got into their share of trouble. And the one story is that Everett was in the barn or in the house, and all of a sudden he heard the pigs squealing wildly. And he went out, and there were Jay and George riding the pigs.
Oh! Big fat pigs.
Yeah, they were, they were there for family foods.
One of the things that I think, Sarah Henry has said that I just really, really love, that Jefferson's future is in our past, and that Jefferson's tomorrow is our yesterday. And so, I really, really love that idea of kind of bringing things back around full circle. And so, we do raise some pigs at this point, and, we
I
sell
want
our
to
own
see
pork.
when that little grandchild starts riding one.
She would.
She's
She's
not a
fearless.
doubt in my mind. Given the opportunity.
Just it's a side thing. But did you ever have horses and ride horses when you were
I always
young?
wanted to have horses when I was little, but my grandfather was not a huge horse fan, and I think when they were done, having them for work animals on the farm, he was just like, yeah, we're done with horses. So I always wanted to have a horse growing up, but now we do. We have 3 of our own, and we're
We
bored
still
to death.
have some of the horse harnesses. They're up overhead in the,
From the work horses.
yeah.
When was that transition? Do
It
you
was
have
like the 50s was when they had the
50s?
last of the
Yeah.
horses
The
here.
horses.
Yeah, what used to be the horse stalls in the barn is now where the calves live.
Yeah. All right, now I want to transition a little bit to various holidays. Christmas is a good one. We can start with Christmas. I assume you cut your own tree here at the farm, yeah. And what sort of memories do you have of Christmas growing up?
This has always been the homestead, for everyone at Christmas, and so we've always celebrated Christmas here, with extended family, and it's always, the to the nines, with, we pull out all the stops for Christmas, and my mom would always start the morning with homemade cinnamon buns. She'd wake up super early in the morning and make cinnamon buns, and so I keep that tradition going. And
Is that a special family recipe?
yeah, I mean, I used her recipe. I'm not sure where she came up with it, but probably so. Yeah, I have a lot of her old recipes in all of our little boxes that, tradition is very, very important to me and important to our family in general. It's very important to me that, my children hear all of the stories and, know all of, what we know about our ancestors and, where we came from. Speaking of horses, a few years ago, my son Gus and I were out riding, and we went to the cemetery where, it would be his great fifth great grandparents are buried, and it was very special for us to take that time. And it's there's a lot that I think gets lost in a lot of more modern families where people are disjointed. They move all over the country, all over the world, and you lose that sense of history. But one of my favorite things, from a few years ago was, we're sitting at the table after dinner and, with the kids and just chatting. And my dad was telling stories about Grandpa, and Gus was sitting in the chair where Grandpa always used to sit. And I just had this thought, like, how many children get to experience hearing these stories in the exact same place where they happened, how many generations ago.
Yeah.
So it's very precious to me.
Well, now let's see. How about, I know there's a story about Halloween that Dave just is dying to tell.
Oh, several.
We'll listen to them all.
Well, some better than others.
Oh, okay.
This must have been, I don't know, maybe my junior year in high school. And Gordon Hammond was still the superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
And his kids had a bunny hutch. And it wasn't that we didn't get, we didn't go trick-or-treating and not get treats, but a group of us decided that we would pick up the bunny hutch, bring it down to the school and see if we could hoist it up the flagpole. Of course, the school staff was smart enough not to leave the rope on the flagpole where it was easy to get at. But Rich Erickson knew a way to get into the school and got in and got the rope down. And so we had tied the rope on the bunny hutch, and we were hauling away on the rope trying to raise it, and it wasn't going anywhere, but we're still pulling on the rope. And we looked up, and here goes the flagpole. Like this. And then just about then, the rope broke and the flagpole was doing this. And I'm thinking, oh good Lord, the whole thing's going to come down on us. But fortunately it didn't.
Better the rope than the flagpole itself.
Absolutely.
He was a pretty good boy overall, though. He was the good brother. He left the shenanigans to his younger brother, Steve.
Yeah, Steve,
Oh, yeah.
Steve did a few more. One Halloween, where Charlie Hubble was the town constable, and he had a farm and a maple farm down there. And up on the hillside behind his barn, he had arranged painted rocks. And
Beautiful white painted
yes,
rocks.
and it was, what, Hubble Acres or something?
Something like that.
Something like that. Well, Steve and a bunch of the boys decided they would rearrange the rocks that said something very uncomplimentary about Constable Hubbard.
Oh dear.
Hubble.
Hubbard.
And he got tipped off, or he came back and found them, and he chased them way off the hill and back into town, at least.
And did they have to put the rocks back?
I don't know who did that, but they went back fairly shortly. But that was Steve and a bunch of his cohorts and younger friends in school at the time.
So is Steve still living?
He's still living. He is in Southern California. He's basically retired. He had spent most of his life buying and selling stuff and so on and so forth. But
Classic California hippie.
yeah,
Happy out there, I assume.
yeah. He spent a little time in the Marine Corps and
Yeah.
got out and first thing he did was, the uniform trousers are very wide. They're not anything like skin tight. So the first thing he did, and he was back here at that point, and he had my mother restitch the trousers so that they became bell bottoms.
That's great. And this was, the Marine Corps never saw those, I assume.
I know. He was done with the Marine Corps at that point.
Gotcha. That's too funny. So we didn't talk yet about other kinds of home entertainment when, I don't know, really, Gail and George were growing up here. Any stories about either, I don't know, cards playing or musical
We
things?
used to have
or...
big rounds of pinochle.
Ah.
I grew up knowing how to play pinochle. We used to sit around the table and with the whole family. That was lots of fun.
Nice.
Yeah, that was. There were a lot of card games for sure. My mom and I both played the piano.
Ah.
So
Do you still have the piano?
we don't have the original piano that was kind of in rough shape. We still have a piano that we got when I was in high school.
Nice, yeah. Okay, we want to talk a little bit about snowstorms and blizzards. I don't know if either of you would remember the blizzard of 57 to 58.
Mhm.
You do, you were here. Oh, please tell us about
Well,
that.
if I remember correctly, it started on a Friday,
I think so.
and we had a basketball game.
Ah.
And I remember looking out the school windows, and there was horizontal snow. So we finished that, and we were living in Summit Street at the time. And it didn't stop snowing until like Sunday.
That's right.
So, the snowplows weren't of the caliber they are today. And apparently the town had a bulldozer that they used to, get the worst of it off.
Was that the year that everything froze in the barn and they had to carry water to
Yeah.
all the cows in the barn?
Yeah,
my.
power went out. And, it took a while to get that back on. Ernie Benson was the scoutmaster at the time, and he gathered a group of the scouts together to take food and, into some of the back roads that had yet to be plowed.
Right.
And so, we packed up and had, snowshoes and toboggans. We're out wading our way through the snow to get into some of the old farmhouses that were totally cut off and would be for another probably a week. That was the year that they canceled school for the whole week, and that as spring finally did come, and I remember with the Hubbard boys, John and Van, we're out playing flies and grounders across from their house, which is now part of Peck and Potter. But we were playing flies and grounders on the snow.
It just never went away.
That was the time when they were still sending milk in cans.
Right.
It was before the bulk tanks and all that kind of stuff arrived. And at that time, the milk was going to the creamery in Blenheim.
Okay.
And if I remember right, George and Russell loaded up the old Farmall tractor, and they had some kind of an attachment they could put on the back of it, and they put the milk cans on it and drove it down North Road to the creamery at Blenheim.
They actually got there.
A
Yeah.
very scary
Wow.
ride.
Yeah,
But that's the thing about milk, you know, the perishability factor. You can't just hold on to it forever.
Mm-mm.
You gotta move it. You know?
No.
And it's
Right.
one of the difficulties of the whole industry.
Well, in fact, there was, I don't know much about this, but I think there was another really bad storm in the late 30s. And I wonder if George Danforth ever talked about what they did with the milk then.
I mean, I suppose they might have turned it into butter.
Ah,
That would have
They
been a
might
way
have been-
around it, I guess.
they might have been taking it to one of the creamers in Jefferson.
oh, they were
also.
still there
So I
then.
think that was still operating, especially the one that was down where the firehouse is now.
Mhm. That was still there, okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't remember it ever being a creamer, but it used to be the GLF. The
Right,
feed store was there.
right. That was gone by the 50s when we were
Yeah.
here, but yeah.
Well, that was one of the two. The other one was the Demarest Brothers one that was up just back of what's now the Maple Museum.
Yeah, remember that?
And the stories about when they closed that up and tore it down, there were just hordes of rats running everywhere.
Oh, I bet, sure. Lunch. Yeah.
Absolutely, lunch ain't here no more. We gotta go.
Where are we gonna go? Good gosh. Okay. So, any other thoughts about those snowstorms before we go on? Because those are pretty interesting. Oh, do you have any photos of it?
No.
Ah.
No. But there were a couple of nights where, when Gail and I were dating, I'd be down here and leaving far too late in the evening. But there were times when I couldn't get back up the road.
So, what did you do?
She gave me a blanket and I slept on the couch.
Aw.
But I mean, once you went past this windbreak, which is pretty much falling apart now, once you got out there, it was a straight shot, and you know the wind just brought the snow in there. And
Yeah, North Road's just
This is-
exposed.
yeah,
not
a
not
very-
not having the most wonderful car in the world added to the.
What did you have?
It was like a 1956 Plymouth or something like this that. My grandfather had it, and he gave it to his daughter, my mother, so that she would have a car up here.
Fun.
We always say that if it's going to be snowing or stormy anywhere, it's going to be right over the farm. We get some pretty severe weather here, as you can see with all of our trees that came down out here. We had 4 trees that came
that
down
storm,
on the
look at
house in that storm a couple of weeks ago. So that's a
Yes.
true testament to how well they built this house. We
Yeah.
had like no damage to the roof or
Fabulous.
windows or anything.
Lost
So
some
it
gutters, and it did uproot a few shingles, but
Mm-hmm.
you know we haven't taken any water in or anything like
Wonderful.
There were a total of 9 trees that were affected with that storm. We had 4 that came down on the house, 2 that came down on the horse fence, and then 3 were leaning. It was wild.
Mm-hmm.
It was really wild.
How long were you out of electricity here?
It's like 30 hours or something.
Yeah,
But we have
that's what we
generators.
have.
We have a generator in the
Ah,
barn and at the
good,
creamery.
good.
So we were very fortunate with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotta milk the cows.
That's right. Yeah. So we didn't talk about other holidays, but I don't know if you'd like to add anything about Easter or Thanksgiving or 4th of July. Any memories about those?
You know, just that this has always been, you know, a gathering place for people, and you know, we've had some big parties here over the years. And,
Wonderful.
It was always, you know, when I was growing up, my mom, you know, I
Yeah.
mean, she loved, you know, having the house full of people, and she was an amazing cook, and you know, just through the most wonderful parties that I think gave many, many people in our family great memories of the holidays.
Thank you. So I want to skip to Old Home Day. What are your memories, you in particular, Dave, of Old Home Day? Because you were here for that. You might not have
really.
any. Right.
I'm going to sneak out for just 1 second,
course.
if you don't mind.
It's too quiet. I know.
Yeah, there's something afoot.
Yeah, what's going on?
Well, most of the old home days was when I was still living up in Jefferson.
Mm-hmm.
And, there would be they had a parade,
Mm-hmm.
and of course the green was filled with, vendors, and they would have some sort of a concert.
Mm-hmm.
And this was back in the day when Howard Schrump was still a magician.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And so he would do his magic thing. And the church, I think it was, started the bed races around the
I
green.
wondered who started that. Okay.
I think either that or it may have been the fire department.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, I can remember, pushing beds around, and it had to have 2 people in it. And they had to have a bundling board between the man and the lady, of course. So nothing improper would
Right.
happen. And, they gave a prize for, fastest time around. And it went counterclockwise around the green, started, somewhere by Hewlett's store, and then went all the way around. And the thing you had to know is you had to put your strongest runner on the right-hand front of the bed, because he was the one that had to make it go around the corners. And
You were good at this, I can tell.
I ran it a few times, yeah. And you're running, pushing this way, and the bed's going that way around the corner. And we did that a few times. And
Did you ever put special wheels on the bed, or?
oh yeah.
Ah!
Now, originally, you could only have 2 wheels that swiveled.
Mm-hmm.
And usually you ran those had to go on the front to get it around the corner. Because if you had all 4 wheels that swiveled, the tail end would go kind of wherever it wanted to. Made it much more difficult to get around. But,
Did any beds ever capsize in
they
the
didn't
process?
capsize, but they crashed a few times.
Oh!
They'd clear all the parked cars out, but they would, head off into the ditch occasionally when they didn't make the corners.
Right. So, did you participate in the chicken barbecue that the church did?
Yeah, to some extent. We when we first moved here, that summer was the summer that they tore down the old Jefferson Academy and had brought the church forward. And I can remember that fall, the MYF, the Methodist Youth Fellowship, was having a gathering in the basement, and they hadn't turned the heat on yet. And we were still living in the Hubble house where the Forrester guy is now.
Okay.
Across the street, the one with all the turrets and
Oh, yes.
everything like that. So Ernie Benson came over and he brought big pot full of milk that he wanted us to heat up and take back there so they could make cocoa. So, we fired up the stove and got it heated up, and I'm carrying this across the street and down the stairs, and they hadn't yet smoothed out the floor. There was still some of the old pieces of piling there, and I tripped on one of those and milk went everywhere.
Oh no.
Just
well, you couldn't
total
see.
mess.
Yeah.
Total mess.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Well then, okay, so Old Home Day, and do you, well, I guess when was the transition, or was there a transition between Old Home Day and the Maple Festival?
As I recall, for a while they had both.
Okay.
And then the maple producers decided to move the Maple Festival from here to the fairgrounds in Cobleskill. Bigger facility, and so on and so forth. But for some of the maple festivals, they would actually set up a whole maple kitchen. And they'd be boiling sap and making syrup and
So you could see
maple
it
candy
being done. Yeah.
yeah, all of
Nice.
that stuff. Making jack wax with the ice in the cups and the syrup
Yeah,
poured over
that's
and so
right.
on.
Yeah. So, were any of your friends, your and Gail's friends, ever a maple queen?
Not that I recall.
Okay.
I think we were a little older by that
Oh,
time.
that's probably right. Yeah.
Yeah. But Kevin Berner has some of the film of the Old Home Day with the three-legged races and that kind of stuff.
Cool. How about the village green? Do you you probably remember it when it had more maple trees on
Yes,
it?
yeah.
Yeah.
And, there was an old tennis court
Oh,
where
where
the
was
current
that?
one is,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of fell into disrepair, and we would play touch football there and over on the main part of the green, and the inner course of the maple trees was kind of the out of bounds
Ah,
for
sure.
it, so it was more than a few folks would run into maple trees occasionally, and so on and so forth. But and we would play, flies and grounders in the springtime there, and hopefully not hit all the balls into the street while there was oncoming traffic and all. But
Right. And well, you were a little older when you moved here, so you might not have used the playground on the green, the slide and the swings.
it was still there. I can remember they had kind of a not a Ferris wheel, but a kind of a
Oh,
The-
one of those
the
round
ring around the
yeah.
rosy thing.
Right.
And of course, that was the playground for the old Jefferson Academy. And Gail, in her class, went through maybe first grade at the academy. And so she got pushed on the slide and she died with a scar across her, under the hairline, just under the hairline, from falling down the slide or getting pushed down it or something.
I'd never heard of an accident on that slide, so she did have one.
Either that or it was one of the swing chairs came up and hit her.
Wow.
But there was a teeter-totter in the swing
Yeah.
and the slide and the old kind of merry-go-round
Yeah.
until they all got to be too dangerous.
Oh, yes, we know. So I think we're getting close to wrapping up here, but let me just check. Are there any particular traditions that you haven't already told us about that are family traditions or customs that you'd like to make sure we hear about?
Other than, the house full of folks and the holidays and that kind of thing, there really isn't, anything that particularly that comes to mind that Shannon didn't already talk about. So.
Yeah, yeah. And does the family hold reunions?
Well, it's kind of interesting because on my mother's and father's side, there were my mother's father was an old Palatine German.
Oh.
So his family were the Palatines that got thrown out of the Palatinate in Germany because they got religiously crosswise of the German king.
Right.
And so he threw them out, and the plan was a lot of them were shipped out of Germany, some to England and out of England, and they ended up down in the Pennsylvania Dutch country.
Yeah.
Well, the group that was my forebears, they were in a convoy out across the North Atlantic, and a storm came and they got separated. So some of the ships ended up going to Philadelphia in the Dutch country where they were supposed to. The others staggered into New York Harbor.
Oh my.
And of course, the English, whatever he was there, had no use for him. But he said, if you would like to go up the Hudson and out the Mohawk, there's land that you can have. So in about 1730, 32, there were 3 brothers that came there, and they're the roots of that part of my family in the New World. It was Heinrich, Christian, and Georg Goettman. G-O-E-T-T, umlaut, and N. And they settled there and became the Getman family. And my grandfather's grandmother was a Getman. And he grew up in St. Johnsville, up there, and became the Getman family historian. And we used to go I can remember going to those reunions. But Christian Goettman was apparently quite a military fellow. He was the commanding officer of the Ranger Company of the Tryon County Militia.
Okay.
And that Tryon County is now, part of it is now Schenectady, and part of it is next door, Fulton, or Montgomery County, I guess it is.
And I think Schoharie came from Tryon County as well.
Could be, piece of it. But he was involved with the Ranger Company at some of the actions in the French and Indian Wars, and at Fort Stanwix, and at Saratoga.
I didn't appreciate that you had roots in this area going that far
Way
back too.
Old time New York. But the oldest clan that is part of my family is my mother's family. They were old New Amsterdam Dutch.
Oh.
They got there before the Dutch sold it to the
English.
And the Museum of the City of New York has an old map that my grandfather showed me that shows a Klaus Van Arden who owned a block or a square. There was a farm, and it was 3 blocks below the wall.
Oh my.
3 blocks below what's now Wall Street. But Manhattan's pretty rocky and it's hard to farm. So he packed up eventually and they went to the country, 125th Street in Manhattan.
Yes.
And that branch of the generation, they had moved up a little bit upstate into Westchester County when my grandmother was born.
I had no idea. Now, I also would like you to talk just a little bit about your mom, because I always admired her very much. She was a great home ec teacher, I've got to tell you.
Well, she was the daughter of Franklin and Paula Bowman, and they had 4 children. Paul was the oldest. Then there was a Franklin Jr., or my mother, then Franklin Jr. and Betty. Franklin Jr. or Buddy got killed on a bicycle. He ran into a car. But Charlotte, they all graduated from Scarsdale High School.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she went to Cornell.
Mm-hmm.
And was graduated as a home economist.
Mm-hmm.
And she got a job teaching in Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where she met my father, Robert Peake, because my grandfather, Robert Peake, he ran the general store there.
Yeah.
It is now a parking lot for the garage because the store burned next to the Methodist church. But apparently she wasn't that impressed with him. And after a couple of years of teaching in Franklin, she took a job down towards Binghamton, and kind of to get out of his way, I think. But she didn't realize that he had all these relatives that came from the Binghamton area. So he looked her up again, and they, ultimately got married, and had my brother and myself. And
she was a very strong, independent lady
yes,
in my
very
memory.
much so. She taught here. She actually did some of the art classes also. And that's one of her paintings there on the wall with the book.
It's beautiful. Do you remember any hippies in Jefferson?
Not really, because we weren't here
Oh,
most
that's
of that
right.
time.
Of course. That's fine. How about stories of bootlegging in the mountains?
Not really. Although it wasn't technically bootlegging, but in my grandfather Peake's store, everything came in huge barrels and this kind of stuff. So he would get cider by the barrel, the hogshead, and it would sit down there, and didn't take long before the rest of the boys in Franklin had figured this out, because he would sell it by the bottle or jug or whatever. But apparently Bob Peake's hard cider got quite a reputation.
He was a great man.
The boys would, bring their jug around, as the saying goes.
Just getting a little apple cider.
Yep, just a little apple cider. Now, whether they took it home and shared it with the family was a whole nother story. But,
Wonderful. And I guess just to wrap up, any other special memories you'd like to share with us that you don't think we've managed to cover?
Not anything in particular. I guess I've been blessed by being able to be here and a part of the community, and hopefully we'll be here for a while longer.
Oh, yeah, many more generations.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Dave, and
More
Shannon,
than
both
welcome.
of you. Really appreciate this.